General of DP. We know the traffic jam has been ugly. We may have to run through your presentation quickly. We apologize, even on your behalf. Even the chair was late. I spent 4 hours from Mukono to here. 4 hours. Yeah. Those are your words, not mine.
Chair,
Yeah.
as a matter of procedure,
Yeah.
the President General of GEM has just presented digitally. We need this information
Oh, yes. Yes, we
to
shall.
be able to. I don't
We
know
shall.
whether the DP
We are
would
working
have,
out with the
would have
Secretariat.
something so that we can,
Yes,
they can
we are
be of use
working
to
out.
us.
Everyone will get a copy of the presentation. This is the new normal. President General of DP, please.
Thank you very much,
You may
Mr.
introduce
Chairman.
your team and then your.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm sure
Chairman,
you know everyone here.
and members of the committee. I'm accompanied by the Secretary General of DP, the Honorable Gerard Siranda Blacks, and the Deputy Party Whip of DP in the Parliament of Uganda, Honorable Leandro Komakech, MP, who represents Gulu Municipality. Mr. Chairman, I want to record my apology. We have serious challenges of having to drive ourselves these days because of social distancing, even from people who normally would constitute our staff. We appreciate your patience. The full document that I'm going to present is available, and the hard copies are going to be brought. They have been sprayed with sanitizers, but also soft copies are going to be made available. Mr. Chairman, DP is the oldest party in Uganda, founded in 1954. DP has played a part in all elections organized in Uganda. As key stakeholders in the political processes of Uganda, we appreciate the work being done by this committee, which you chair, the entire Parliament, and the Electoral Commission to discharge its cardinal functions spelled out in Article 61(1)(a), and I quote, to ensure that regular, free and fair elections are held. As DP, we take due cognizance of the time frame for elections set out in Article 61(2) of the Constitution of Uganda, which requires presidential, general, parliamentary and local government council elections to be held within the first 30 days of the last 120 days before the expiration of the term of the President. We therefore fully appreciate the spirit and circumstances that have led the Electoral Commission to condense a number of electoral activities and also modify the modus operandi of campaign activities. It is clear to us that you are making an attempt to balance the dictates of Article 61(2) of the Constitution and government requirements for social distancing in the fight against the spread of coronavirus that has wreaked havoc around the world. Mr. Chairman and members, the reason why we are here is to present our views on the options for 2021 elections, given the COVID pandemic and the need for constructive engagement by all political parties and formations. There are 4 options in our view. 1, postponement of the elections until the threat of COVID is no longer a factor. I don't need to go into details of the WHO standards for declaring a country COVID-19 free. The second option is to ignore the enhanced risks of infection, but taking precautions during electoral activities, and even hold mass rallies, the Malawi and Burundi way. The third option is to review the law to accommodate the so-called scientific elections, or suspend the elections entirely. The fourth option is to hold an inclusive national dialogue to build a new national consensus. The aim of the dialogue is the healing of a hurting and divided country and to build a bridge to the future through a transitional government of national unity. Those are the 4 options. We know that all options have advantages and disadvantages. The reason we are here is because, much as your committee is a committee of political leaders, you are the ones who determine compliance with the law in whatever we do. You are we would call you the National Bureau of Standards to ensure compliance with the law. Mr. Chairman, we take note of the roadmap issued by the EC and in particular the restrictions on methods of campaign. DP believes that the so-called scientific campaigns and elections places a discount on the constitutional right of Ugandans to a free, fair, and credible election. Elections cannot just be reduced to the act of casting ballots. Elections must provide for active engagement between the voters and those seeking to be elected to public offices. The infrastructure for digital campaigns are also inadequate in most of the country, and even where they may be available, they are too costly and inaccessible for various reasons. The government insists that the threat of COVID-19 is so grave, and that is why public gatherings, including religious gatherings, are banned. But the same government finds it unnecessary to declare a state of emergency in order to allow for flexibility in implementing the election timetable. We believe that the threat of COVID-19 is being exaggerated for purposes of swindling public funds and to rig elections by undermining the will of the people. If indeed the pandemic is as severe as it is said to be, then the proper thing is to declare a state of emergency and focus on saving lives instead of a deceitful trade-off in the name of scientific elections that may in any case be overrun by the emotions that an election season generates. Mr. Chairman, once campaigns are declared, whether scientific, digital or not, the emotions that campaigns generate are going to overwhelm whatever regulations we may impose. And it will simply be like what is going on in Chikubo and the Arua Park. We are concerned that the NRM, and in particular President Museveni, would want to use the so-called scientific election as a way to walk back to State House unopposed. To acquiesce in the so-called scientific election without a consensus of all interested parties would amount to accompanying the incumbent on a victory lap virtually unchallenged. We insist that if the corona pandemic is a real national threat, there is no need why President Museveni cannot follow the law, act within the law, rather than issuing informal edicts reminiscent of Idi Amin's roadside decrees. The President should declare a state of emergency and postpone the election if the threat of coronavirus is so grave that borders cannot carry passengers, citizens cannot move at night, schools are closed, public vehicles can only carry half of their full capacity, shopping arcades are closed, and houses of worship are closed to the public. There is nothing illegal about declaring a state of emergency. It is provided for under the Constitution. Mr. Chairman, the Electoral Commission seems to base its decisions on advice of the Ministry of Health. Under the Constitution, the EC is independent and the Ministry of Health cannot be held accountable for its actions. There is nowhere in our laws where the EC is supposed to base its activities on advice from the Ministry of Health. The campaign style released in the roadmap issued by Justice Byabakama has no legal basis. Let's have a free and fair election so that nobody cries foul that they have been rigged. The idea that digital campaigns are enough to enable voters make an informed choice is laughable. Even under normal circumstances, access to radios and TVs is not easy for the opposition. The penetration of the radio and TVs to villages is not sufficient. While the opposition is locked down looking for radio stations that are friendly, President Museveni will be traversing the country in his other capacity as sitting president, campaigning and dishing out gifts to voters. He will also use his LC1 and 2 network in addition to the nationwide security apparatus which he has privatized to campaign for himself and his candidates. It is therefore unreasonable to expect voters who have not seen the new candidates to vote for them simply by listening to them on radio, even if the radios were availed at every location. Districts for instance, like Bududa, where there are no radio stations, will cast blind votes. Candidates for local government positions will be burdened with the task of traveling to the districts where there are radios and beg to be on a radio owned by NRM bigwigs. In short, the proposals for a scientific election does not meet the constitutional standard of a free, fair, and credible election. We, however, note that the proposed changes in the revised roadmap indeed have a number of legal and operational challenges that we think need further reflection and discussion. That's why we are here. It is in that spirit that we have come before you, and we appreciate the fact that you have made it possible. And because of this work, we know that there are legislative amendments that are required. For instance, media owners should be compelled to provide spaces on their outlets for political actors in a non-discriminatory manner.
President, I think your Secretary General has gotten sanitized copies of the presentation. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, sir.
But you have to have them on record that you are laying. Just mention that whether those are the copies.
I'm obliged, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members, it's my honor to present to you and the committee copies of our presentation for your record, and the Secretary General will hand them over to you.
Proceed.
Oh. Mr. Chairman, I know I cannot address your members directly, but through you, I want to appreciate that comment. Mr. Chairman, of course, as a footnote, whatever we are doing because we don't know how this virus behaves in total. We are acting out of fear. Even those who are so advanced scientifically don't know. As a political party, Mr. Chairman, we are concerned about the disenfranchisement that may result from the so-called scientific elections, and we would call for deeper reflections on it. We have also reflected on that roadmap, which has banned public campaign rallies by whatever name called, and also imposing a requirement that all candidates shall campaign digitally. The Electoral Commission has promised, thankfully, to consult all stakeholders prior to issuing the final guidelines to be followed. We thank the Electoral Commission for that openness. While appearing in several public meetings to explain the so-called scientific election, and Mr. Chairman, to be fair, the word scientific is not a word from the Electoral Commission. It's purely a creation of the media. The Electoral Commission simply stated what would be allowable based on the Ministry of Health advice and what would not be allowable. The word scientific is not from the Electoral Commission. So, but while appearing to explain their new roadmap, they stress the fact that their hands are tied, that under Article 61(2), they have no choice but to hold the forthcoming elections within the first 30 days of the last 120 days before the term of the current president expires. And that is non-negotiable, according to Justice Byabakama. In other words, he said he does not make the laws. He is compelled to implement the laws. And he said the election must take place notwithstanding the government's anti-coronavirus measures, which among others have banned public meetings and even rallies. Justice Byabakama also referred to Section 50 of the Electoral Commission Act, which grants the Electoral Commission special powers to issue particular or general instructions to meet the exigencies of, and I quote, an emergency or unusual or unforeseen circumstances. My call on behalf of DP is for the committee to scrutinize whether the guidelines issued by the Electoral Commission exceed their powers and discretion under Section 51 of the Electoral Commissions Act. They have a latitude in an emergency or unusual or unforeseen circumstances. I know the Electoral Commission can do that. I'll give an example. In 1996, when I was contesting for Parliament, there was a guideline, in fact, was put in the law for elections in restricted areas, which meant soldiers at the front line would vote and put their ballot papers in envelopes. Imagine the candidates never campaigned to those soldiers, but thousands of votes actually arrived by helicopter to be counted. And I knew whose votes those were. Fortunately, Mr. Chairman, through you, in their overzealousness, they used the army payroll instead of the register of voters, and they also used photocopied ballot papers. So we caught them in the act. That's why I came to Parliament. If we had not caught them, I wouldn't have come to Parliament. Yes. Mr. Chairman, I'm just using that as an illustration that when you are appointed as the Electoral Commission, provided you are exercising your powers properly, that's why Electoral Commissions can postpone an election for a day. That's why a polling station may be closed down and they can vote at another time. That's why some sub-counties can vote afterwards. Those are powers that the Electoral Commission has. But our request to you is to scrutinize and advise the country as to whether they have not overstepped their powers by saying no mass rallies. That may actually require an amendment of the law itself rather than them issuing it as a guideline or a subsidiary regulation. Mr. Chairman, Justice Byabakama also said Section 21(1) of the Presidential Election Act, Section 20 of the Parliamentary Elections Act, and Section 123(5) and 172 of the Local Government Act also grant the EC further powers to determine the time and manner of candidates' campaigns anyway. In fact, this is the most contentious issue. Whether Parliament is going to assume that the Electoral Commission should take full charge given the grave situation of Corona, or Parliament will take charge as our representatives for all Ugandans and with the power to legislate and to represent us to make sure that they can override some of these declarations by the Electoral Commission. That's the main reason why we are actually here. We are not saying the Electoral Commission has no powers to determine the manner of campaigning or to regulate campaigning. But we are arguing that by saying no mass rallies, they are overstepping their powers, and we are appealing to Parliament to step in and look at the principal law so that the Electoral Commission does not have too much latitude. Mr. Chairman, DP believes that the Electoral Commission directive to conduct candidates' campaigns digitally is therefore unlawful, invalid, and unconstitutional. First and foremost, the discretion to determine the time and manner of candidates' campaign by the EC under the aforementioned electoral laws is not absolute. It is plainly qualified by an overriding constitutional duty to organize, conduct, and supervise free and fair elections as defined by the Supreme Court in 2001, 2006, 2016. We are arguing that whereas the Electoral Commission has discretion, but that discretion is qualified by the test of what a free and fair elections means. under the Supreme Court judgments, which are now part of our laws, Mr. Chairman. Now, these definitions were approved and adopted by the Constitutional Court in the Rubaramira Ruranga versus Electoral Commission and Attorney General case, that is Constitutional Petition number 21 of 2006, and the 4 leading cases which determined, among others, that, and I quote, to ensure that elections are free and fair, there should be sufficient time given for, at all stages of elections, nominations, campaign, voting, and counting of losses. I suspect, Mr. Chairman, based on my eavesdropping of the JEMA President's submission, that his plan to go to court would lean heavily on these decisions of the superior courts of Uganda. Mr. Chairman, in Ruranga's case, court quashed Electoral Commission guidelines that sought to limit candidates' campaigns in local council, women's council, and youth council election to just 5 minutes. The abuse of discretion by the Electoral Commission is what is at issue here. At that time, the Electoral Commission said the youth should campaign, the women, youth should only campaign for 5 minutes. And the court stepped in and said, no way, that is not adequate. Despite its good intentions, the EC directive to ban public campaign meetings and require candidates to campaign digitally will obviously have a more harmful effect of forbidding and discouraging the active participation of all citizens at all levels in their governance, and is therefore inconsistent with democratic principles enshrined in paragraph 2.1 of the National Objectives and Directive Principles of State Policy and Article 1.4 and 61.1 of the Constitution. That is why we say that directive is invalid, unlawful, and even unconstitutional. The EC is convinced that COVID-19 prevention rules currently enforced throughout the country prevent a normal general election from being held. Otherwise, it would have not invoked Section 51 of the Electoral Commissions Act as the legal basis for its ad hoc ban on political rallies. In fact, the Electoral Commission is basing its decision on the advice of the Ministry of Health and the statutory instruments in order to invoke Article 50, which gives it powers to restrict campaigns if dictated by emergency situations. We believe that the Electoral Commission's inventiveness in this manner greatly offends cardinal principles of our constitutional democracy. It is based on a misguided, biased, and self-serving interpretation of the Constitution and our electoral laws. Instead of purporting to invent a makeshift scientific election as a response to COVID-19, an independent electoral commission, acting in good faith to protect the life of all Ugandans, ought to have reported to the President, Parliament, and all stakeholders that the COVID-19 situation prevents a normal general election from being held, so that the President would then be duty-bound to declare a state of emergency in terms of Article 110(1)(c) of the Constitution, or ease the COVID-19 rules appropriately with a view to safeguarding our constitutional democracy. Mr. Chairman, the Electoral Commission has been dishonest. If they knew that they could not be able to perform their duty according to the standards imposed by the Constitution, all they needed to do was to report. Their independence does not mean that they are not accountable. They have a duty to report. Even a pilot, Mr. Chairman, who is on schedule to fly a plane, can report to the dispatcher and to the airline company that the bad weather does not allow takeoff at the scheduled time. A pilot cannot insist that I must take off because the flight has already been announced and the passengers have already checked in, therefore I must take off. Mr. Chairman, we cannot accept Ugandans to sign a suicide pact with the Electoral Commission as an accomplice. They needed to tell the President they needed to tell the president that, Mr. President, under the current conditions, we cannot perform our duty, rather than colluding with the president whose interest is to ensure that the ritual takes place.
Isn't collusion a very strong word?
I withdraw, Mr. Chairman.
Then,
Acquiescing, would that do? So, Mr. Chairman, the message the Electoral Commission should have brought to the country and the institutions of state, namely Parliament and the President, is that allow us to report to you that we cannot perform, guide us. Instead of the President saying, go to the Ministry of Health. The other thing is, the President would have then said, okay, rallies can now take place. But I believe the President does not want to take responsibility for a suicide pact by Ugandans. We feel very strongly about this point, Mr. Chairman. That's why we have stressed it. Mr. Chairman, the new roadmap by the Electoral Commission also disregards our fundamental human rights. The Electoral Commission has ignored the fact that in exercising its powers under the aforementioned electoral laws, it remains duty-bound to respect, uphold, and promote the fundamental rights and freedoms enshrined in our Constitution. Article 59(1)(a), the right to vote, read together with Article 29(1)(a), 29(1)(d), 29(1)(e), and 29(2)(a). That is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of protest, freedom of association, and freedom of movement, respectively. All these freedoms are now being ignored. It is even worse because the Minister of Constitutional Affairs and Justice is now amending the constitution of political parties who have a constitutional right to associate and agree on their rules internally. Mr. Chairman, whereas the rights and freedoms at issue may be limited as a means of combating COVID-19, the restrictions invoked by the EC and government for this aim must not be arbitrary, unfair, or based on irrational considerations. They must be evidence-based, informed, and they must also be revisited frequently. Mr. Chairman, I overheard the committee saying government has to keep monitoring the pulse of the nation in relation to how COVID-19 is affecting Uganda. More importantly, they must not impair the rights and freedoms at issue disproportionately. That is, beyond what is necessary to accomplish the intended lawful objective. In short, the limitation must be acceptable and demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. They cannot be speculatively justified under the banner of, I quote the words of the EC, unique local circumstances. In any case, COVID-19 is global. So the Electoral Commission cannot pretend to be basing its decisions on unique local circumstances. We call it a pandemic because it is global. It is not local. So the Electoral Commission is out of order to say their roadmap is based on unique local circumstances. Applying this strict weighing and balancing test in Article 43 of our Constitution, the requirement to conduct candidates' campaigns digitally is not a reasonably justifiable measure for dealing with COVID-19. In other words, we object to it as a necessary derogation, which is justifiable. The digital campaign is not defined in any gazetted instrument, which means that it shall be the subject of multiple interpretations by LDUs, law enforcement authorities, including notoriously trigger-happy vigilantes who may shoot candidates and their agents for merely taking a stroll on the street or handing out a flyer to a potential voter in a market. There is unacceptable vagueness concerning the range of prohibited conduct. Is it only political rallies or public gatherings of all kinds that are bad? Are processions also prohibited? And if so, why? How about the statutory meetings of political parties and other political organizations? I wish to note here, Mr. Chairman, that the Democratic Party processes of electing grassroots structures, and even the possibility of holding a delegates conference, which attracts close to 3,000 people, is right now on the balance. The only thing we are able to do is to compile a list of delegates and sit and wait what is likely to happen. Fortunately for DP, our constitution provides that the leadership of the party can hold office until the next delegates conference. It doesn't talk of obviously having been founded by very serious people. They foresaw many of these things, hence the flexibility. It was not a copy and paste constitution. It was designed by great legal minds like the late Justice Mulenga, the late Henry Kayondo, the late Kirenga, and such legal minds. Mr. Chairman, the ambiguity we are talking about of what is not scientific. In other words, law enforcement are now going to say, your campaign is not scientific. This is the risk. and that will apply across the board. Even candidates will now go and mobilize law enforcement people to come and say that one is campaigning unscientifically. Yeah, this stick is going to beat everybody. So the ambiguity creates a chilling effect. Rival candidates will now be monitoring who is campaigning scientifically and who is not campaigning scientifically. So this creates a chilling effect on many rights and freedoms of candidates and political parties. Delegates conferences, meetings to select party flag bearers. Conflicts are going to intensify in political parties as candidates will feel like the current leaders of the party are biased against their candidatures. And those who are new entrants will also feel that this does not favor them because the incumbents in public elective offices are more entrenched in the institutions of their parties. The new entrants will therefore be unfavorably treated. We will not be able to train even new candidates on how to campaign since gatherings are not allowed. We will not be able to train polling agents and even consultative meetings, planning, organizing campaigns. All these will be simply accepting that our freedom of expression, access to information, freedom of movement will be trampled on. Therefore, the revised roadmap and the directive for digital campaign is based on speculation, and none of us can determine its effect in reality. We are still discussing it theoretically. In practice, it may actually be worse than what we are discussing. For instance, there is no evidence of adequate and balanced distribution of media resources. I said Bududa has no radio station. Palisa has no radio station. Karenga doesn't have a radio station. The other day, the government spokesman said that the Uganda Communications Commission has now allowed for what they call in Luganda, mizindalo, namely a long metallic pole with loudspeakers above and a kind of mixer in a small room. If so, the government should now invest in those. For instance, they should be put in all markets, all the townships. They should now be government owned so that at any given time a candidate is talking. These are some of the practical ideas that we want to present. The idea of distributing radios is bogus because if distributing food which is available has been difficult, if now masks are not being distributed because local government are still waiting for money to distribute masks, in Gulu itself, hundreds of thousands of masks are in the store that they are still waiting for money to distribute masks. I'm sure if the government said masks are in this place, go and pick, people will go and pick. But government officials, like I said, there's a money bonanza and people want to swindle money. You may think it is a strong word, but that's the truth. If you told people that masks are at the sub-county headquarters, people will go. But the sub-county officials are looking for a way to eat part of the COVID money by saying, first bring us money before we distribute. How come when people are running from ward, people don't ask for transport? Mr. Chairman, the revised roadmap and the directive for digital campaign is speculative. Lastly, there is abundant evidence of the potential for interference with or obstruction of electioneering activities of other persons, especially we in the opposition. Obviously, the government has an unfair advantage over us. The suggested regulation of private electronic media in the manner that would promote equality is a legal impossibility, given the constitutional protection of media freedom. Uganda is based on free enterprise. You can only commandeer a radio station if there is a state of emergency. The DP has considered the options for 2021 elections given the pandemic and the need for constructive engagement by all political parties and formations. The options that we have considered, we have already stated them above. We therefore call for more consultations. We hope, Mr. Chairman, that when you engage with the Electoral Commission, you made it clear to them that they don't own Uganda and they don't own elections. They are merely instruments. Therefore, we urge you to remind the Electoral Commission to make it clear that the so-called scientific and digital election places a discount on the constitutional right of Ugandans to a free, fair, and credible election. In the alternative, the Electoral Commission can consider a hybrid of measures that have both digital and physical campaign engagements. It could consider allowing physical campaign gatherings in areas with zero or very low incidences of COVID-19 infections. In addition, the EC should consider campaign number thresholds to allow candidates interface with their campaign agents at a minimum. For example, a candidate should be allowed to engage with a maximum of 500 people at a time, observing the standard health guidelines on social distance and wearing of masks. The idea that social media will help is also impractical. When I was trying to talk to my old aunt about Facebook, she instead called me the other day and said, "Tell me again about the book face." That is how weird the whole thing sounds. In the event that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to make it difficult for physical meetings, the EC should consider engaging all other stakeholders, Uganda Communications Commission, Office of the Attorney General, and relevant organs of state to cause such amendments to the law that will provide equitable access to the state and non-state media.
Chair, I know the President General is about to complete, but I realize that he is, I think, trying to conclude. You have left out to read out the full text of paragraph 2 of your page 7.
That is the options.
Yeah, we need you to bring out.
I started with
because
them.
they are recorded. Because
Yes.
they are recorded. That's why I want you to put it such that it's captured on record.
Actually, I started from that.
Two is very attractive to Honorable.
What I said-
But he had already said.
What I said is the options that have to be considered include postponement of the elections until the country is ready, ignoring the enhanced risks of infection but taking precautions during electoral activities, and hold mass rallies like Malawi and Burundi, review the law to accommodate the so-called scientific elections or suspend elections entirely, and have a transitional government of national unity to deal with the challenges of a deeply wounded and fractured society. As a footnote, Mr. Chairman, we have had a government that has lasted for 35 years. I belong to the generation born in the 60s and 70s. We had a generation that was born after the Uganda crisis. And every rain that has beaten Uganda has beaten us directly. We are also the generation that is stuck in the traffic jam of politics because of the changes in the constitution that does not allow traffic to move. So,
I hope you are still with us.
yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
So, for those reasons, we need to address the real problems of Uganda. And we need, as we said earlier, a new national consensus. Mr. Chairman, a country can only be stable if it is based on a sense of consensus. Irrespective of whether you are in NRM or in the opposition parties, there must be something that we all want to protect when it is endangered. But when Uganda reaches a position where people just say, let it burn, I think we don't have a spare country as Uganda. This is the only country we have. And those who are in the NRM, you should know that your responsibility is even higher than the responsibility of those in opposition, because you are the ones in the cockpit driving. If we crash, the question will be, who was the pilot? Yes. So that is why this is the time to think about options to elections to build a bridge to the future. Mr. Chairman, there are areas that we hope we can discuss in the spirit of problem solving. One proposal to be considered seriously is to hold the local government, parliamentary, and presidential elections on the same day. This would save a lot of money in transport costs, costs of security personnel, and election officials. However, this would require the splitting of polling stations to reduce the number of voters per polling station in order to avoid excessive crowding at polling stations. In addition, the blanket ban on mass rallies should not bar candidates from holding town hall meetings and targeted meetings held while taking the necessary precautions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Mr. Chairman, we believe that elections are very important processes for renewing the social contract between the leaders and the led, and therefore very critical processes for national cohesion and peaceful coexistence. Therefore, all efforts have to be undertaken to ensure that elections are credible, free, and fair. We should not have anything less than this. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now we know why you took a little while in the traffic jam, because the paper is good, and I mean it. DP and Gemma today you provided, it's nearly, some of the issues are crisscrossing and similar. Our work is going to get easier when we get candid positions being brought before us for purposes of reporting. Honorable members, I now want to, it's coming to 3. I want to ask if there are some questions. Mr. President of DP, you talked about the national consensus. What is the legal framework in our Constitution to begin with?
Mr. Chairman, Uganda is not the only country that has faced crossroads. I know that Uganda is scarred by conflict. I also know that there is a simmering discontent, not necessarily political discontent, but also economic discontent. So the idea of a new national consensus is basically to do what we did, which led to 1995, but which we started undoing through tinkering with the Constitution. Mr. Chairman, the President of Uganda already launched the national dialogue process. The President of Uganda even issued a proclamation endorsing the national dialogue process. The purpose of this consensus is to agree on a few things. Number one, that an election cannot solve the problems that we have. Somebody is bound to cry foul. Majority, minority is not how people can live peacefully. Some countries have solved those problems through creative legal frameworks. In the US, all states send 2 senators. That's the only way to ensure that even a small state like Alaska can be equal to California and New York. In Uganda today, there are people who simply just are keeping quiet and pretending to be happy. But the truth is, if they are brought to the table to talk about their grievances, you will find that people are just coping with the framework because they think there's no other alternative. The Americans solved that problem through 2 houses, where they have the House of Representatives, which is based purely on numbers, and then the upper house, which is based on regions. It is President Museveni who has said that his government's achievement has been to move away from politics of identity to politics of interest. So, if we are moving to politics of interest, then we must look at ensuring that all the interests are protected. We need more powers to outside Kampala. Mr. Chairman, the reason why everybody wants to be president of Uganda is because it seems unless you are president or unless the president comes from your place, nothing can ever be done. If we could export Professor Sempebwa, who went and helped Kenyans write a constitution which created the counties to ensure that resources are shared to bigger units, rather than in Uganda where, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, for my language, but some of the Mickey Mouse districts that really don't have the capacity. There are districts that are always lagging behind. And we indeed have assessments by civil society organizations and so on. And if you have a region that is planning for a bigger area, I think the country would not be able to cheat a region, but the country can cheat a district just by making sure that the leaders of that district are made happy, however few they are. But if you have a bigger entity, let's say you have Bugisu, you can cheat Bulambuli, but you can't cheat Bugisu. That's a kind of consensus that we are talking about. There are other things like national service. I think the Uganda of today, somebody is born in Gulu, he goes to Gulu Primary, goes to Gulu Senior, studies in Gulu University, works in Gulu local government. The view is that everything begins and ends in Gulu. When will we have people like General Ronda, who studied in Kitgum High, Amelia Chambade, who studied in Sacred Heart, my father, who studied in Namilyango, Wafulo Gutu, who went to Teso College, Aloet. Yes, Chegobe, Elijah Okupa. Mr. Chairman, those are some of the examples of the things we need to build a consensus over.
Okay.
But my proposal is that the country must sit and we reason together. I'm not saying our ideas are the best or the only ones, but we must not focus too much on elections as a way of, there must be some given. Even in our households, Mr. Chairman, if you brought your salary and called your children and wife, and you say, let's vote, chances are that the entire budget will go to ice cream and those kind of things. Because it's the majority. But if you start with a consensus and say the one for school fees, for rent, and water and electricity is already given, that means that now there are things that are non-negotiable. The non-negotiables in Uganda have become so few that everything now can be negotiated, and that is not a recipe for a stable country.
Well, I'm glad to hear that this work in progress. If political parties would toe that line, Uganda would be a better place to live in. But there are those who believe that they have to do it through election. And our electoral system, the winner takes all. Yes, Honorable Kamateka. That the winner takes it all. The loser loses everything.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'd like to thank the DP President for a good paper, as you have already pointed out. And just want to point out that, yes, we do agree that we should allow candidates to interact with maybe a reasonable number of people. Actually, the other day I remember putting it to the Honorable Minister that if we can hold a meeting of about 50 people in a room like this when we are socially distanced, what would stop one from holding a meeting in a playground with about 600 people? But on second consideration, how would you determine, yes, maybe you can have chairs, so there are 600, those who are seated are 600, but how will the candidate ensure that there are no people hanging around on the outside the perimeter of the playground? And how will the candidate ensure that as they leave the playground, they do not crowd around? Those are issues. Even in the town hall, it would be difficult to stop people from crowding around and peeping through windows, and you know what it can be. So how can we ensure that we ensure the security of the people by making sure that the number that you want are the numbers that will turn out? Because even for a wedding, a social function, even when you give cards, people do come. So how do we address that concern? Then also, you mentioned Burundi and Malawi, Mr. President. These are the worst examples in Africa. Burundi held elections, yes, but where is His Excellency Nkurunziza? Malawi, since the elections, the rates of infection have been going up, and they have lost 16 people. Before the elections, no one had died, but now they have recorded 16 deaths. So if we can engage on how we can keep out those people who are not invited, to stop them from crowding around, maybe we can make progress on this. Thank you.
Would that be possible for voters in Mitoma to be kept away when you're in Mitoma?
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Essentially, that's the essence of the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, let me finish with the ladies, the Honorable Lady.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Through you, Chair, I want to welcome the President of DP. It's always a pleasure to see you, sir. President General, thank you for that correction. I want to particularly commend the DP party for bringing on board the young Turks, particularly Honorable Siranda and Leander and the rest. I know that DP, and of course, the President is still in that generation. And I want to thank them for a very good paper that has been presented. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask the President General one small question.
Information. to my childhood friend.
Please, I take the information, Chair.
Yes, all parties have younger presidents except one. That's the information I wanted to give you.
I acknowledge that. I agree with you. And I'm one of those who actually thinks that we should bring in the young Turks. This is the time in all political parties of Uganda.
I think the reason there is only one older party president is for obvious reason to guide the young ones. You can proceed.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I just had one small question to the President General, because I acknowledge in the beginning he noted that about 4 months have been lost in terms of the election calendar. And I want to ask him, being one of those contenders who would actually be now moving in the countryside, canvassing for support, whether it is still possible to conduct an election which is free, credible in your view, and fair, in view of the time that has already been lost in the election calendar, because this time would be used by the political parties in identification of their flag bearers. And I want to relate this to what you put before us. Mr. Chair, what the President General has put before the committee is a fishing basket, which we already know in terms of a way forward. And if you look at page 7 where he raised these proposals, these options is what we are battling with. I want to be honest with you, party president, that these are the 4 options we are battling with as a committee. And I'm wondering, knowing you as an honest man, in terms of course, I see the last option is one now which is being agreed to by you and FDC. But in terms of your ranking, probably, in your order of priority, which of those would be ranked as number 1 in the view of the circumstances that we find ourselves in as a country? Thank you, Chair.
And maybe as you answer, your option, which is, I hope the option is guided by the law as it is, which option best suits us according to the legal regime which is existing or obtaining. Yes, Honorable Silwani, for information, Bugiri district has 3 members of parliament in this committee of 29. Tomorrow we shall have the Secretary General of NRM, and the House will be full board. But anyway, we have no choice. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the President General of the Democratic Party for the wonderful presentation to the committee. But I have these concerns. And my former party, both parties were my former parties, because from DP I went to JEMA and I saw the light. President, what is your view if this committee comes up with a situation where we have maybe to pass a guideline that supports meetings like of 200 people, because we have seen Parliament sitting, we are over 500, but sometimes we sit and hold a debate constructively and do the business of the day. If we can have constructive meetings of 200 people, social distancing, political meetings, what is your view as the Democratic Party? Then also, what is your view on the voting day? What do you think would happen if communities are encouraged to come in progressively, not at a go, progressively from morning to evening in smaller groups? What would be your view?
Progressively, do you want
progressively,
alphabetical
for lack of words, not alphabetical order, but coming in, I'm trying to borrow, occupying it as Lusoga, but not Lusoga, but trying to borrow a lump sum of words, like they come in bits. Then lastly, Mpola. Lastly, as a presidential candidate to be, because I'm aware that you're one of the candidates intending to vie for the first seat, what is your view if you held rallies at regional level? For example, you sit at Jinja and meet the whole of Busoga region. Maybe you talk to the region, and that rally counts for the region. Maybe you speak on radio and then talk to the region. Then you go to Bunyoro region. What is your view in that kind of
Speaking
campaign?
on radio regionally,
Regionally, like regional campaigns.
not calling people to come.
No, not calling people to come.
Okay.
Digital campaigns, but regionally. Like you pick a region, Bugisu, you go. What is your view? And then lastly, wouldn't you think that this kind of digital campaigns would start a new era in this country where monetization of politics, where you have to meet voters, group voters, and transport voters, feed voters? Wouldn't you think this would be a new era where we would tremendously reduce the cost of election and then see an era where elections become cheaper than what has been happening in the country, and then we start a new era with the scientific voting? Those are the opinions and questions I have for the Democratic Party president. I beg to submit.
Yes, Honorable Waluswaka.
Thank you very much, Honour Chair. Indeed, Chair, I want to thank the President General of DP. I love DP because of their honesty. But Chair, I'm a senior card of NRM because of ideology. You know, you can be honest, but without ideology. But Honour Chair, President General.
Waluswaka, even being honest is ideology.
Okay,
Yeah.
I thank DP. Honour Chair, the document which the President General prepared is not signed. I don't know, from nowhere. Yeah, but for the one of chairman is signed. If
We understood they have to be sanitized.
yeah, Chair, because I came late.
Yes.
Since he's a very honest person, if he would send for me on behalf of NRM. But Chair, he talked very well that there are things which may not be negotiated. And he talked about school fees and what. Those are things which cannot be negotiated. In this case, President General, the issue of postponing elections or not voting is non-negotiable. Now, since you're a very sincere man, kindly advise the country how this should be done. But I don't believe in what my brother is saying, you just go to the region. I don't believe in it, but because of the pandemic, Honour Chair, we are going to win with a very high margin, and people will say because of corona, because of scientific. If there was a way where we let people move and public gatherings are there, and as a party of NRM, we whoever is going to pick a nomination, hands down. Otherwise, I'm seeing an issue where people will say we are defeated because of COVID. So, Chair, I want to thank the chairman of the Democratic Party, and my concern, yes.
The honorable member is saying the issue of holy election is non-negotiable. I guess that's not the position of the committee. Whose position is that?
I think the honorable member, being an engineer, he knows that Article 61, as long as it's not amended, you can't do much. I don't know whether that's what he meant.
No, he said the view. The views are the people of Bunyole West. Yeah, the view, not for the chairman, but for the people of Butaleja. Because for us, Chair, we are waiting for Honorable Mau to come and people greet him. That's the challenge. So, but whether he can't come, the issue of postponing elections, that one should be a rest in everybody's hands. How we do it, the issue is election. Otherwise, I want to thank President General and my senior brother, Chiranda. We love you, and we pray if you can cross to NRM and you bring those ideas, we shall work together for God and my country.
Those were words from Bunyole West. Yes. Honorable Aston Kajara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the President General of DP really for his elaborate presentation to the committee. It's only unfortunate that most times some of these things don't come to be implemented. The options are many, and this question has been asked. On the option of holding a full-fledged election at the risk of exposing many Ugandans to death. Is it the cost of constitutional democracy should include death? Chairman, and many people have argued about balancing the right to life and the right to other enjoyment of other human rights. At the risk of causing death, if you release people this freedom of association, assembly, they exercise the right to vote. I asked this question to my brother from Jema. Would DP be happy if we went for a full-fledged election? And every person who has come here has talked of Chikubo. There are so many people in Chikubo. How many Chikubos do we have in Uganda? You see, for an election, once you release people, even Gulu will become Chikubo, Karamoja will become Chikubo. Chikubo is an isolated place. It's on one isolated area. So if you release Ugandans, I don't think even we have sufficient security police to make boundaries. Don't reach here, don't reach there. People have proposed that you go home to home, walk around the homes. If you are an infected person, you move from home to home. You keep spreading it to those people. A husband or a wife goes to a rally and comes and infects the whole family, and they die in the name of democracy. Would that be appropriate for the Democratic Party? And if we opened up, can the Democratic Party say, okay, for us, we shall take responsibility in case Ugandans die? The other one, Chairman, is as members of POD, I read in the papers that even NRM, which is in power, is opposed to, disagreed with scientific and digital voting. And they are the people propagating that idea before this committee. What's your view? I tend to disagree with the President General when he says that this COVID-19 drama is over-exaggerated as a way of swindling government money. We all know this is a global problem. It is not NRM, it is not Ugandan. And where it had not reached, it has reached there. Countries like Russia, when they started, they had very few cases, but now the cases have really risen. China, they thought it was over, but it has been coming time and again. So it is not true that in Uganda it is over-exaggerated. Thank you.
Honorable Basalirwa.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I thank the President General. I just have one comment. President General, do you think as Parliament we have moral authority to talk about postponement of an election in light of our own history? That about 2 years ago, there was an attempt by us to extend our tenure by 2 years, which attempt was thwarted by the courts of this country. Should we really find ourselves as when postponement becomes the only viable option, how would you, the public, the representatives of the wider public, receive that proposal? I thank you.
So I think that is also brilliant. Do we have more authority, Mr. President General? How about the conflict of interest? Shall we be, let's merge, though some other people said that God had used Parliament several years ago to foresee what would have happened. So, yes, Honorable
Information, Mr. Chairman. Information.
Yes, Honorable, yes?
Against what Honorable Wasari has said, this country has seen situations from 1971 to 1980. We did not have elections, and the country continued.
Even from 1980, what? When the NRC was extended?
86 to 96.
Yeah, there was, it went on being extended. When the president was the speaker, yes, Honorable Mugoya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank my friend, Honorable Norbert Mao, for the paper presented. One, I wanted to get his views whether we can use this presentation as the views of the Democratic Party on the statutory instrument before us. Okay. Number two, I don't know whether it was an oversight on page 4 of your presentation, paragraph 3, whether you intended to indicate the first 30 days of the last 120 to mean 122 as per the amendment of 2018. Was that your intention? Then, number two, I was looking at your paper entirely, and I wanted you to be quite clinical whether there are situations, particularly like the one we have, the current pandemic, whether on its own evolution it can curtail the enjoyment of democratic rights in this country vis-a-vis other jurisdictions. And then number three, I wanted you to shed more light how we can handle the discretion given to the Electoral Commission by law under the various provisions you have cited on page 4 of your submission. That is to say, but not limited to, Section 50 of the Electoral Commission Act, 21 of the Presidential Elections Act, 20 of the Parliamentary Elections Act, and others cited by you. How do we handle that jurisdiction? And then number two, you also talked about...
Did you say number 2?
That is number 4 now.
Okay.
You also talked about Article 110, how a state of emergency can be declared in the present situation given the trend of events. I don't know whether Article 110, as I put it to your colleague, Honorable Basalirwa, whether it is discretionary or mandatory as a function to be exercised by the President. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we shall invite you to make your responses. But before you do that, I must acknowledge, as chairperson, you've helped this committee to cite legal provision. You did not just talk. You did not just talk. Yeah, you and the JEMA, you've done us well. That we have, because this committee is about the law. We can't handle the politics. Handle the politics, which is with the law.
Honorable Chair, it wasn't merely the law, citing the law, but you know, they have given us an insight of the current jurisprudence in terms of matters to do with the application and enjoyment of democratic rights in the country as of today.
Yes, and I was commending them, JEMA and the DP so far. We wait for NRM. Our preoccupation, this is not a political committee for dialogue or whatever. This one is for the law, yes. President General of DP.
Yeah, maybe the difference is that the two party presenters are of legal minds, they're learned friends. Maybe.
Okay, well, yes. General, and by the way, if you are, some of this you can take home. You don't have to give all the answers here. Because some of this we might want you to have them in a written form. We are going to quote you as we report to the committee, to Parliament. We want to quote these political parties. And we are not inviting people who are not here, apart from civil society. Parties represented in Parliament.
Yeah, has the Democratic Party tried to engage the EC about some of these issues which they raised in their paper? And what were the answers?
That's the answers? Yes, but if there are those that you can, I know there are several, about 7 or 8 people asking questions. We have Honorable Bas Agaba Mugisha from Chitagwenda, Nia Mwenge. Now he's Nia Mwenge, Kamwenge. Yes, yes. So we are glad to have you here. Yeah. I know that it's lunchtime, so past lunchtime, but we have to go through this because there's no other meeting after break. And the next other meetings, we shall work with the Secretariat. We can either have them from wherever. Yes, when you're ready, I will switch off my mic. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We deliberately decided to avoid politics because this is a defining moment in our history. And therefore, whether we take a good decision or a bad decision, we can never escape responsibility for the decision. Mr. Chairman, I have some observations concerning COVID-19 and Uganda and the elections. The recovery rate in Uganda went very high in June and July. It actually balanced the sharp increase in infection that was reported in June. right now, the risk of hospital overload is very low because most people have been discharged. I was joking with the Honorable Leandro Komakech that I would advise the President of Uganda to think about commandeering the parking lot of Parliament as a possible facility for treatment of COVID victims just by installing air conditioning. Yes, because during an emergency, it can be commandeered. I saw that is a very good place. Beds, actually about 1,000 people can be kept there in a very safe environment. No, I'm saying I was joking. That's so the risk of hospital overload is low anyway. But in case it becomes high, we have options. They are talking of Nambole and so on. Mr. Chairman, we believe that the government deserves credit for ensuring that Ugandans are safe from COVID-19. Those measures were necessary, and DP was very proactive in channeling ideas. Some of the ideas that the government is debating, like putting PVC transparent barriers between a border rider and a passenger, those are our ideas. The government has said they are still studying it. In other words, we are solution-oriented, not problem-oriented. The problems of Ugandans are known. What we need now are solutions. We are not looking for mourners. We are looking for leaders. So, another observation, that the level of community transmission had shot up, but it is now contained as we talk now. And COVID-19 is primarily an imported truck driver disease. That's really what we know COVID to be in Uganda as of now. And that is based on evidence. The other observation is that after 4 months, fatality is at 0. Compared to Malawi, where 2 weeks after their election, fatality went to 16 immediately. Mr. Chairman, so it looks like either we have a mild strain of the virus. As you know, scientifically, viruses have strains. Because our ministry say they are successfully treating it with hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, antibiotics, and vitamins. Virtually all the patients in Uganda are recovering without going into intensive care. And then, most of the patients are asymptomatic. They are said to have corona, but they are not coughing, and they are not showing any signs. Then, therefore, hypothetically, if we embrace mask wearing and sanitize ourselves, wash our hands, and then we keep our borders tight, and then we reopen the inland economy, given the low risk. That means it is actually possible for Uganda to ease.
Honorable Chair, I seek clarification. Why do you deliberately use the word hypothetically?
Mr. Chairman, I'm using the word hypothetically because I've been advised by the scientists I talked to. Because nobody knows how the virus is likely to behave. So, what I'm saying is that while social distancing is impractical, I think on social distance we must admit that we have failed. And we don't pretend that there's any social distancing. So, it is so what I'm saying is, with wearing masks, hand washing, and tightening our borders, including saving money by not testing truck drivers who are just passing through Uganda. We should only test the truck drivers who are coming to Uganda. Because most of the billions we have spent, we are testing people who we shouldn't be testing. We are testing those going to Congo, those going to South Sudan, we are actually donating our resources. We are saying we rather have a compulsory quarantine if you are in transit and see you off to the border. That is a proposal we have put on the table. Then the question is, how do we get Ugandans to embrace mask wearing and frequent hand washing in the high population and close contact vectors? It now looks like the people have relaxed. 2 months ago, I went to Nakasero Market. I washed my hands 6 times at every section. Vegetable section, you wash your hands. You go to the fruits, you wash your hands. But now, people are wearing masks. Others are putting it over their beards. Others are putting it over their heads. Others leave the mask hanging on the ears. Others cover the mouth but not the nose. And it looks like people just want to see a mask. They are no longer interested in seeing how you are using it. So that is an alert which we have got to sound. Now,